I can remember eating ravioli all my life, and as a kid my mom made them, and she always made them by hand. I can remember seeing her make them, cut them out and make them by hand. But my mom could cook anything and make it taste good, and I mean anything. Here's a picture of my mom just before she died. She must have been in her late 40s there. And this is my dad here, about the same year. You know, when you taste food that your mom taught you how to cook, it has to have a nostalgic tie to when you grew up. It always reminds you of home.
What is it really that makes it home? We tend to think of home as a place, as our physical surroundings and all the things we put in that place to make it feel like our own. But if we move and that sense of place changes, the people in our lives can still give us a similar comfort, even if they're not still with us.
Really nice tomatoes.
We all have different ways of remembering our loved ones. And for Lou, so much of that is in the garden and in the kitchen, keeping up the traditions that were passed down to him.
You know, if you pick them, you got to do something with them. I'm kind of proud of my garden, you know. I'm 92 years old and still able to get down here and raise some garden.
And Lou is such a great storyteller. So whether he's gardening or cooking or anything else, he will always connect whatever he's doing back to certain people.
Yeah, my dad always had a garden. We always had tomatoes and green peppers and things like that. And he raised garlic, raised his own garlic and his own sweet basil. And I used to raise sweet basil and I used to raise garlic, but you know, I don't work in the garden all day like I used to because I can't, you know, it's hot and I just don't have the physical stamina that I once had. You know, I told the doctor, you know, I work pretty hard, and he said, well, it's better to wear out than rust out. That's what he told me.
His mom taught him how to cook, his dad taught him to grow the ingredients, and his wife Jessie taught him how to can tomatoes. So when he gets into making spaghetti sauce, it becomes this story with all of these layers about people who mean so much to him.
"28 quarts of spaghetti sauce is all I make a year, and that does me. That only takes about 10 quarts of tomato puree that I make. We're going to be through with these tomatoes here in a minute.
And there's so much effort that goes into that sauce. From keeping up the garden, to harvesting the tomatoes, to processing and canning those tomatoes. It's just a lot of work before he even gets around to cooking. Of course, he could just buy a spaghetti sauce that tasted pretty good, but to put in this amount of work, especially at his age, it just says so much about what this particular sauce means.
Well, the spaghetti sauce, my mom made it, and after I got married and moved away, I didn't have access to that unless I'd go back to the house when she was cooking, and I'd have it there. And so I decided that I had to learn to make that. It's really a good sauce. I always use 6 onions for 2 gallons of sauce. And I always put a little celery in it too. You leave one thing out and it changes the flavor some. And of course this is the way I learned to make it, and it's just the way I do it, that's all. She gave me the recipe for the sauce. Didn't have the amounts that went in it. So the sauce, it was pretty hard to duplicate it because it was a trial and error thing, even though I had the ingredients.
When food gets passed down as an oral tradition, the methods or cooking techniques might be pretty clear, but oftentimes the recipes themselves aren't very precise. So we rely on our memories and our personal experiences to tell us exactly how to recreate the flavors that we know so well.
Now, the next thing is the spices. I knew that you use rosemary and oregano and thyme and parsley and garlic and salt and pepper. But a little bit too much thyme will overload your spaghetti, or a little bit too much oregano will overload it. And I kept experimenting, I got it regulated, and I got the taste that I wanted. And it tasted like my mom's.
There's a big difference between making a dish or a sauce that simply tastes good and making it in a way that allows us to associate it with certain people and honor the way they made it. That's true for family recipes in general, but it's especially a story you hear from immigrant families. Because when you move to a new place, you move to a new country, you eventually might lose important parts of your culture. You might lose your language over time. You might lose your music. So food is often what's left of your culture. It makes it so much more important to get that right.
This picture was taken in 1910, and it hangs in the Railroad Museum at Cass. But this is when my dad first came to this country, and that's my dad right there. My mom and dad were both Italian immigrants, and my dad came here when he was 16 years old, couldn't speak a word of English. He went to work on the Greenbrier Cheat Elk Railroad, and that was my Uncle Tony. He was already here. And you see, those are all Italian immigrants, and they didn't call them by name. They gave them a number, and that's how they communicated with them. Okay, they were exploited and taken advantage of, and considered low-class people. But back then there was so much prejudice, But growing up in the Italian families, they were really clannish back then. Not by choice, but out of necessity. And, Italians associated with Italians. And I can remember we lived in Montgomery. There were only about 5 or 6 families of Italians that lived in Montgomery. And the rest of them lived over at Smithers and Boomer. Boomer Hollow was full of Italians. And Smithers was an Italian community. They called it Little Italy because they worked in the coal mines, and that's where they settled. The Italian families, they would gather at somebody's house every weekend, and they would eat and play cards and socialize. It was kind of a comfort, you see. They was all together. Everybody was comfortable, Most of their gatherings, was all around food. You went to visit an Italian family, and they put something on the table to eat, and you had to eat, or they would be offended. Of course, this is the Italian sausage that I use in it. My mom always used what we call the lesser cuts of the chicken. She would fry the good cuts, and she would use the necks and the wings and the back to flavor her spaghetti sauce with. And so I'll let that simmer a little bit. Now, she always made her sauce with pork and chicken. She always used two kinds of meat in hers. But my mom and dad, they always raised food, and they always canned food. I helped my dad raise a garden. It always puts me in touch with him, you see. Here, we'll dig the end of this road so we don't have to get up in that mud.
Lou certainly has his parents' skills of gardening and cooking and preserving food, but he also inherited their strong sense of hospitality. And you'll see this if you pay him a visit, because he will insist on feeding you every single time.
Well, I get these potatoes out of here for you.
And if it's summertime, you will probably get a full tour of the garden, and he won't let you leave without a bag that is full of produce.
Let's go down and get you a couple onions. Let's walk up this way, we don't have to walk in the mud.
And if he's making spaghetti sauce, you will want to go with him to the cellar when he gets his canned tomatoes. The shelves are filled with hundreds of beautiful, colorful jars full of food. There are so many years of his hard work, but also so many generations of family wisdom on display.
And these are the juice tomatoes. These are what I make my sauce with. These are my home canned tomatoes. For 2 gallons, I always use two quarts of tomato.
And Lou is so proud to use those canned tomatoes in his sauce. And, he'll also add some tomato paste and tomato sauce from the store, but for as long as he's able, if he can use some of those tomatoes he canned himself, it maintains this important tie. Not only back to that whole cycle of gardening and preserving food, but to the people he learned from.
Some tomatoes are more acid than others. Mine are usually pretty acid because I cook them down pretty good. All we have to do now is let it cook down. So the sauce is done. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and mix the filling for the ravioli. All right. My mom, she made ravioli and spaghetti. She made spaghetti about every week, but ravioli twice a year. Okay, now here again, I make my ravioli filling strictly by recipe, and it's a recipe that I got from my mom. Now, she made 2 kinds of ravioli. She made them with meat, but she actually made 3. And she made them with cheese, and then she made them a mixed. Well, I prefer to mix the cheese and the meat mixed together.
Over the years, Amy and I have shared so many meals and so many conversations with Lou, and every time he talks up this ravioli. We might be calling each other on the phone to talk about the green beans growing in our garden, but he'll still remind us that we need to come down for ravioli.
You start out with roast beef. Now, I always roast beef. I always roast my beef in the oven, and this is farm beef that I got off of the farm. The roast beef changes the taste. Now, you fry a hamburger, and you eat a piece of roast beef, it has a different taste. Now, my mom never made it with ground beef, and I wanted to make it like my mom made it. I'll spoon this 2 pounds of cheese in here. I always use Italian cheese, and then this has to be mixed up pretty good.
And it's not like this can happen all the time. It takes a lot of planning, and Lou kind of makes an event out of it. And that's how it was when he grew up eating this ravioli from his mom.
She made them at Christmas time, and she'd make them at Easter, and she would make them at special occasions if somebody special came in and she had to do something special. Of course, after I got married, I moved away, and I would still go back home when she made them. Now I'm going to start adding the ingredients to this, and as I add them, I'll set them over here so I don't forget anything, you see. And when you get old, you forget. So there's the cheese, and 1/2 cup of Roman cheese. Okay, that's a 1/4 cup.
Lou makes his ravioli over the course of 2 days. On the first day, he makes the filling, and that extra time allows for all the flavors to settle. But also, ravioli is just such a long, involved process. So, especially if you're making the sauce, it's just way too much to fit into one day.
Man, that's gonna make a ton of ravioli. This will make 50 big ones. Okay. Now we'll add the eggs to the mixture. That don't look like it's fit to eat, but I swear it's really good. My left arm gets weak, and I gotta put it down below me for a minute. It's almost mixed. I'd say that's about done. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll make the skins for the ravioli, and we'll start out with this recipe that I use calls for 4 cups of flour.
And the next morning, Lou makes the dough for the pasta. It's really just a simple 4-ingredient recipe, but it is still a lot of hard work.
My mom used to, when she made them with only the egg yellows, but I use the whole egg when I make it. So I'll break 6 eggs into here. Even with 6 eggs, you have to add about 1 eggshell of water to make enough moisture for a good mix. Might be a little place in the flour here, and I'll pour these eggs right in there.
For his age, Lou is incredibly active, but being almost 93 is still taking its toll.
It's starting to get there now.
It makes it harder and harder to pull this off.
To change arms. I don't have much strength in my right arm at all. And in my old age, I lost all my muscle in my right arm.
And that makes you appreciate it more. It makes it so that it doesn't have to happen on a holiday for it to be special.
Nowadays, they got machines to mix this with. But I've always done it by hand. I've never used a machine to mix with. Oh, it's getting there. Now I get my mom's rolling pin. I know this rolling pin's at least 100 years old. And when you're rolling this out, I'll show you in a minute, you kind of have to stretch this dough. Now, this is the way I've always made them all my life. And you can see from this that this recipe makes enough to feed a good-sized family. You know, about 3 or 4 of these is all you could eat at a meal by the time you had your salad and other stuff. We're just about ready to start cutting, my friend. And you have to leave a little bit of edge on them, because if you don't, you know, you don't have room to crimp them. It's right time consuming to make them, because you know, you have to go around each one of them, but you know, it really takes time, but it doesn't take time either. These things will come apart in the cooker if you don't crimp them, you see. So I go along and I crimp every one of them by hand. Well, buddy, there's the finished product on the ravioli. I'm gonna put these babies in there now. You have to be kind of gentle when you put them in there. You can't just flop them in there. Those things expand quite a bit when you put them in the heat. See, they were about like that when I cut them. They expand to twice as big. That's why I say if you eat 3 of them at a meal, you got to be pretty hungry. And homemade pasta has altogether different taste than store-bought pasta. And you know, my mom, she would fix, usually once a week, she'd fix 3-course meals. And if she was having fried chicken and other things, she'd have a plate of spaghetti as an appetizer. You eat your spaghetti first and you ate your meal. So cooking was very, very important in Italian families. I think we can start getting this stuff out now. Yeah, we'll let these drain good, because sometimes they fill up with water and the water's hard to get out of them. But we lucked out this time, they all stayed together. We didn't have one to separate in the... Okay, now we'll put them in the pot over here. We'll put some sauce on those. Now we'll cover these with sauce. That way they keep them sticking together.
Amy and I have collected lots of seeds and recipes that have been handed down for many generations. And we don't always have the chance to interact with tradition bearers as they're growing the plants and cooking these dishes. But when we do, and when we hear the stories, it changes the way we relate to that food.
All right, here we go. We're ready to put this on the table now.
You know, I've only seen Lou's parents through pictures. But when I eat this ravioli and when I open a jar of Lou's spaghetti sauce, I think about them. And I almost feel like I know them because they live on through this food.
Folks, I guess we're ready to eat. Here we go. Bless us, O Lord, these thy gifts which we're about to receive from thy bounty. Thank you, Lord, for this day and this good fellowship and good friends. And be sure and bless the ones that prepared it and provided it. These favors I ask in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I know some of it will be lost, but the spaghetti sauce and the ravioli, you know, I passed it down to my family. They have recipes, and I'm sure when I'm gone, they'll carry on and do it. There we go. Them things really swell up after you cook them. It means a lot to me because it keeps me in touch with where I came from and my roots, you know. And it's kind of like going back in time for a visit when I'm able to make these recipes that my mom handed down to me. And they mean a lot to me. Now, this is about as Italian as you can get. Mike and I have been talking about these ravioli for 2 or 3 years.